We came under heavy fire from down the street, and I ran into this house with a reporter and a Marine. And when we got inside the house, we saw a lot of munitions, and the Marine said, "We gotta get the hell out of here because this place might be rigged to explode."
When the 9/11 attack happened, I was actually in an airplane flying from New York City. So I didn't know that the planes had even struck the towers. So I was with my mom, and we were flying on what was supposed to be a two-week vacation to Italy. And we landed, and that's when I discovered that 9/11 had happened and the world had changed.
I thought a war would be happening, and yeah, I believed that I would be involved in it and would be covering it for sure. Didn't know where and how, but yeah, as the weeks kind of unfolded afterward, it was pretty obvious that this was going to unfold in the Middle East somewhere.
It was basically that moment. From that moment on, I was immersed in 9/11 and beyond. I was told to not come back to California, to stay there and take over for people who, for LA Times photographers who had already been covering the past 2 weeks at Ground Zero.
There was sort of a revelation that day when it happened. I was getting ready to take my kids to school. As we were driving to school, they were in young kids' elementary school, and I started to explain to them that the world is changing right in front of our eyes, that our lives are going to be different from this day forward.
And then I flew back to LA for the holidays, or just to get a breather, and then they wanted to send me back to New York after that to cover sort of the holidays around the 9/11 event. And on my way to New York, I stopped in Alabama to see my dad, who was living there at the time. And I got a phone call from the office, and they said, "Hey, Rick, do you think instead of going to New York, you can just keep going and go to Afghanistan?" And that was a shocker.
I had a feeling that that was going to happen, and I hadn't decided at the time whether I wanted to cover any war that might have ensued from the 9/11 incident.
I was pulled in an office and they told me that I was going to go to Iraq to cover Saddam Hussein's election. I guess Saddam sent out invitations to news organizations to come and cover his re-election campaign. Handlers would take me on election day, to a polling place where busloads of people were brought in to chant Saddam, Saddam. He did win the election, by the way, apparently a 99% vote. That was announced the next day.
I think if you were working at the LA Times or any other major newspaper at the time, it was pretty obvious what the big story was. And the story was Iraq.
This is what we do. We are news photographers. It was the biggest news story we could have faced in our lifetime. Who would have known that there would be other more monumental things happening since 9/11, but certainly it was at the time the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my lifetime.
I feel like the job that we do is important. It's kind of a calling. We are there to try to be the eyes for people that can't be in these places. And I feel a sense of duty and obligation to that. And I felt like I could handle it. It would be something that I could, a challenge that I could overcome. And I really wanted to tell that story. I'd already been to Ground Zero, and the weight of that certainly came with me when I went over to Afghanistan.
Went there trying to just cover what was happening, so was just hoping to show, maybe somehow draw a connection between our lives here and the things that were happening there. One thing that stands out was this community wedding. They would have monthly communal weddings that people who couldn't afford to put on their own weddings. The state would give them a wedding, and everybody would come together and in a big group, dressed in their finest wedding attire, and the services would be handed to them, and then they would go off to their separate parties.
I looked for a story, and with the help of a reporter, came up with this idea to follow this group of National Guardsmen from Riverside and San Bernardino to Iraq. I thought it was very important, and when I stayed there and did some coverage there, I realized that this is super important to our country, because we're blowing billions of dollars every week in this country.
The story to be told is what the American troops were doing there. It was an American story. We were invading a country that was, being held at that time responsible for sending, people to create 9/11, and the story is really about the troops that I was with and and what they were facing. And that story changed over time. I went, back to Afghanistan many, many times over the years, and it became more of an Afghan story, and what we as a nation were doing in Afghanistan, and what we were trying to build, and were we bringing democracy? Were we building up their military? What was our mission there? For me personally, I got swept up in the story as soon as it started. I was literally thrust into it. It was, and it became something I did for 10 years.
It was important to cover this conflict for various reasons. There was, of course, the political part of it all, the commitment that this country was sending our service members over there for multiple tours of duty, being attacked, being hurt, maimed, killed.
I feel like I spent a lot of time there. I shot a lot of images that I think were meant for the moment, that people needed to see at that moment, and give an understanding to viewers of what it was like for our troops over there, what it was like for Afghans living in Afghanistan, for Iraqis living in Iraq. It really hopefully told the story of the human condition, the impact of what we had.
Everybody knows me for the shot of the Marlboro Marine, for better or worse. That's the shot I'm going to be known for. It was in the assault on Fallujah in November 2004, and Fallujah then was a real hotbed of the insurgency. And when night fell, there was a major artillery bombardment of the city, and it looked like a giant fireworks show. Then we came under heavy fire from down the street, and I ran into this house with a reporter and a Marine, and when we got inside the house, we saw a lot of munitions, and the Marine said, "We gotta get the hell out of here, because this place might be rigged to explode," right? So we ran out of the house again and immediately came under fire, like heavy, heavy fire. We regrouped with the main body of Marines, and then the house where we're at, we're standing at the gate. They kicked down the gate. They kicked down the front door. They went through the house to secure it, room by room, and then a bunch of Marines ran to the rooftop. I was up there. I peered my head up over the edge of the roof with the other Marines and saw this RPG heading straight towards us. And I have confirmed this with other people since, that it was like by some miracle it veered away at the last second. After that RPG veered off, I just basically sat against the wall. And Blake Miller, the Marlboro Marine, came from somewhere, and he sat on a wall opposite from me. And I was just looking at him, and he started lighting a cigarette, so I basically just instinctively took a photo. So that is actually the photo that that I took in the Iraq War.
I really wanted to make it about the human condition, what war was like, what dangers, everyone faced, the hardships that they went through, and, just really put it in people's faces, because there's a lot on the line there. A lot of people, died and lost their lives for this, over this time period. And my job to cover that put me in close proximity to those situations. And I just wanted to plainly, honestly, through pictures, bring people there.
Well, what I learned from that one specific photo, the Marlboro Marine, is that, whatever expectations you have of a message or a story that can be delivered through an image or a series of images is really, it's really unrealistic to expect anything, because people that see that image or that series of image will come to it and evaluate it using their personal frame of reference, which you might think is just the craziest interpretation of a photo. Well, that's the way some people think about it, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I don't know if we really, any of my images had any sort of deep, long effect on anybody, but I just think we was as part of the historical record, trying to be honest, trying to tell the truth as best we could.